So let's turn to talking a little bit about how one establishes good credit. Knowing that we probably all are going to need to use credit at some point in our lives, it is, even though we may use it sparsely, in other words, we may use it not very often, it is a good idea to have a good credit rating because there are times that you will need to call upon it. Some of the ways that you can establish a good credit rating if you don't have one already are doing some of the things that you ordinarily do in life anyway, and that's the good news. If you're going to establish a checking account or a savings account in your name and maintain a balance there, that will help you establish good credit. It's a good idea to save some money out of your income. No matter how much money you're making, you probably should put something aside, even if it's a small amount, in a savings account, and that will help you establish a good credit rating. Another way or another objective that people use to establish a credit rating is to make sure that they have some of the utility bills in their name. So if you pay your power bill each month or your cable bill or whatever it may be, that will also help you to establish a credit rating. As you pay every month, you're establishing a record for yourself that you're a reliable person. You can take on a small debt and you will reliably pay your monies that are owed every month, every quarter, whatever the period may be. You can use a credit card to establish your credit if you can get one, and most of the times credit cards are fairly easily acquired these days upon application. It is a good idea probably not to use a credit card very often, or if you do use it, sometimes people use a credit card for some of the benefits like frequent flyer miles or maybe that 1% discount that you get, things of that nature. That's okay as long as you're disciplined enough to pay off your bill every period and don't incur any interest payments along with it. But if you use your credit card to make some periodic purchases and then pay those off frequently, that will also serve to help you establish your credit. Sometimes the major credit card issuers will not allow you or will not issue you a credit card right away if you're establishing new credit, or maybe you're coming out of a situation where you've had bad credit and you're trying to reestablish it. There is a way of possibly getting a department store credit card. Those are sometimes a little more easily obtained, so you could make some purchases of clothing and pay them off right away to help establish your credit rating. It's very important, though, not to abuse that. Oftentimes the department store credit cards carry a pretty high amount of interest, so you just really have to be disciplined about your use of those things. Another way of doing it, even if the department store credit card is not available to you, is to establish a secured credit card or secured credit transaction. What that really means is that you're putting up the credit in advance. Somebody may issue you a credit card, but it's based off of a deposit that you've already made. Perhaps you would deposit $1,000, for example, and then they would give you a $1,000 line of credit. Now, obviously, you've got to come up with the money in advance to do that, but if you can reliably pay your bills, even on a secured credit card, that will help establish your credit if you're really trying to establish your credit rating in the first place. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the things specifically that creditors look for when they are deciding to give credit to an individual. This could be a credit card company, it could be a bank, it really could be any form of a lender. In the industry, generally with lending, people talk about the 3 C's. The 3 C's, of course, are character, capital, and capacity. Character really is best described by saying that a person is willing to pay their debts. They're not late, they're not delinquent on their debts as they come up. They pay them on a regular basis. The credit agencies that exist in this country will keep record of that, and businesses to whom you owe money will make reports about whether or not you are making timely payments. There's really no bill that's too small for this. Credit reports are made by the cable company, by the satellite company, by the power company, perhaps even a doctor's office from which you receive treatment. So if you're showing a record of late or delinquent payments, A creditor will have a tendency to look at this in terms of character and say this person does not have the character necessary to issue credit because they don't have a general willingness to repay, or at least a willingness to repay on a timely basis on the agreed terms of the arrangement. If you are able to maintain a steady job with a steady income, that is another thing that they will look at. On the other hand, if you are transient, in other words, you move around a lot, jump from job to job, that's not going to be very helpful to you in your credit rating. They will look for a person who is going to be able to take a job and stick with it. That's not to say that you can't change jobs from time to time, as most of us do. But it is important to understand that when you do make those life decisions to go from one career to another, to move from one job to another, it does have a tendency to have at least some impact on your credit rating. They're looking for stability. You know, stability in many ways. We've talked about income, but it can also relate to your residence. Transience is not only measured by the jobs that you keep, but also the homes that you keep. If you stay in one place, that means creditors can find you. If you move around every 6 months, creditors have more difficulty finding you. So they consider that to be a risk factor in giving credit. Now, military families in particular sometimes have a little bit of difficulty with that because obviously if you're active duty, you're going to have to PCS move every once in a while, and you can't help that. So it's all the more important that you keep in good stead on all of the other factors. At least in credit terms, owning a home is better than renting. I'm not suggesting that that's the best decision for everyone and the best decision in every set of circumstances. But from a creditor's point of view, they consider you to be more stable if you own a home as opposed to rent a home because you're committed to a particular locale. It's about that overall idea of stability that they're looking for. Now the second C, capital, really amounts to your assets. What do you own? Do you have any real property, in other words, land? Maybe a lot of us only own the land that our house sits on, perhaps, but maybe you own some farm ground back home or something along those lines. That can be considered in the credit equation. Any real property that you own. Accounts, assets, money, even personal property like a boat can be something that would be considered in the credit equation. The more capital that you are able to acquire and keep, the more reliable of a credit risk that you are going to be considered. Finally, we can talk about capacity, and that is really an equation that relates to your ability to pay a debt. Every time that you apply for a credit application, especially if it's a large amount, they will run a calculation to see what your debt-to-income ratio is going to be. Are you carrying a lot of debt? Certainly this would be a big factor in whether or not you would be able to receive a mortgage, or maybe what amount of the mortgage that you would be able to be approved for. How much debt are you taking on in relation to your income? If you have to pay out a very large fraction of your monthly income because of outstanding debts, then creditors are going to be less likely to allow you to take on more debt.